Good evening, everyone, wherever you may be joining us from. And I believe this includes people from not just the British Isles, but also friends from the Baltic states and possibly beyond. I'm Jan Ledoux, Chairman of the South East region of the National Sheep Association, and I'd like to welcome you all to this first evening of our online conference, SHWAP 23. As in previous versions of SHWAP, the previous virtual version anyhow, we have 3 sessions over 3 evenings, tonight, tomorrow and Thursday. And we hope you'll be able to join us for all 3 of those. This year, we're pleased to be the opening act of the National Sheep Association's designated Sheep Health Week. And to say a few words about this, I'm delighted to welcome the NSA Chairman, Suffolk sheep farmer, Dan Phipps. Dan.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for what's obviously going to be a great week. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the National Sheep Association South East Sheep Health, Wealth and Production Conference. Originally a face-to-face conference held at Surrey University Vet School, SHWAP moved online in 2021 during the COVID outbreak, giving it the opportunity to attract a wider audience. Although the SHWAP conference is again online this year, NSA has organised an inaugural Sheep Farmers Conference, which will be held on Wednesday at the National Conference Centre at Birmingham. Tickets are still available for FU. So this becomes part of the National Sheep Association's Health Week, along with the online SHWAP conference. And part of this as well, SCOPs have a podcast running at the moment, launched this week, the first one today, a series of 4, sheep scab, one on sheep scab, one on liver fluke, one on using fecal egg count, and I might have missed one there, but they'll be available, which you can track down on the SCOPs website. So the Southeast region, capably chaired as Jan, who you've just met, with a lot of assistance from Matt Blythe, have put again together, and of course the committee as a whole with their involvement, a fantastic lineup of speakers over the 3 nights this week. Titled tonight, Improving Flock Efficiency, Tuesday, Measure to Manage, and Thursday, Annual Feed Budgeting. So the Southwest region again this year has pulled together a sparkling lineup of speakers with a huge depth of knowledge and experience on their given subjects. So without further ado, I'd like to wish everybody an enjoyable conference. And I'm certain that we will be able to take something away and incorporate into your flocks and businesses. So we'll go back to Jan, but just before doing so, I'd just like to put a thank you into the major sponsors being MSD, Elanco, Matt Colston's with us tonight from Elanco, Rapper, AgriWeb, and our mainline sponsors, which are British Wool and Cotswold Seeds. So thank you very much. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll hand back to Jan. Thanks, Jan.
Many thanks for that, Dan. Now we'll get on with the business for the evening, and I'd like to welcome tonight's chairman, Matt Colston, who's ruminant technical consultant with Elanco, to introduce tonight's speakers on the subject of, as Dan said, improving flock efficiency. Matt.
Thanks, Jan. Just before we introduce the speakers, a little bit of housekeeping. Anybody who is looking for SQP AMTRA points or ROSA points, could you please put your name and registration number in the chat box? And as we go along, if there are any questions that come up, if you write your questions in the Q&A box, we'll see them as we go along, and we can either put them to the speakers as we go or save them up for the Q&A at the end, whichever is going to be most efficient way of using them. So names and numbers in the chat box, questions as we go in the Q&A box, and we'll carry on. So it's my great privilege to introduce the speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Lesley Stubbings, and Lesley's going to guide us through taking the first steps towards better efficiency, better productivity. Lesley's an independent sheep consultant, graduated from Nottingham University and has spent over 40 years working as a consultant in the sheep industry. Following a period with ADAS, Lesley started her own business in 1997, providing specialist advice on all aspects of sheep production for farmers, vets, corporate bodies, government, and NGOs. Lesley has had a central role in the development of the SHWAP group and still maintains strong links with her farmer clients, monitoring the physical and financial outputs of their flocks and keeping them on their toes for continuous improvement of performance. So I'll hand you over to Lesley now, and then as the changeover slides, I'll introduce JP, Chris and Dan for the second section. Over to you, Lesley.
Thanks very much, Matt, and thank you for that introduction. Hopefully, you give me a thumbs up if you can see that okay.
Yep, that's good.
Yep, okay, thank you. It's gone too far, but never mind, we'll go back to it in a minute. Excellent. Right, okay, so a massive subject area. I've got about 20 minutes, so you'll have to bear with me because I'm going to drill down a little bit. But first, to say thank you very much for letting me kick off this week. I think it's going to be a very exciting week, a lot of ground to cover. So I hope I do set a little bit of a tone and make people think a little bit, which is what I've tried to set out and do this evening. So everybody can take something away, I hope. And I hope it links in with what JP and Dan and Chris are going to be talking about in terms of health plans. So in terms of improved flock efficiency, as I say, it's a massive, massive subject. And I think, you know, my first question was, well, what do we mean by efficiency? And of course, that's going to mean different things to different people. But from your point of view, as you listen now, or if you're an advisor listening now, and wanting to know what to talk about with your customers, your clients, you know, it's important to get our heads around what we mean and what it is we're actually aiming for. So Matt mentioned physical output, and that of course is a very important part of efficiency, and that is where I'm going to really concentrate in the short time that we've got tonight. And there, you know, we can start to look at efficiency factors such as kilograms produced per ewe rather than just straight numbers of lambs. We can perhaps think in terms of kilograms of carcass per hectare if that is a priority which is more appropriate for you. We might be looking at financial things, so it might just be costs, variable or fixed costs, and of course from a financial efficiency point of view, again, that's important. I will drill down then into cost of production, which is how many pence does it cost to produce a kilogram of carcass. And I'll just use that as one example tonight to fit in with what we're doing, just to show you how powerful that can be. Might be profit. It might be emissions. It could be carbon footprint these days. That is a factor of efficiency. But I'm not going to go into that tonight, but it's simply to say, and please do come back to me if you disagree, but for me, a physically efficient flock also has a lower carbon footprint. And I'm going to work on that basis tonight, that really, you know, if we're worrying about emissions, having efficiency, and particularly, as we're going to talk a bit more tonight about physical efficiency, which in itself will lead to financial efficiency, that for me is where I'm going to park that one tonight, because it's a whole different subject area. But of course, these factors, the kilograms of carcass, the cost of production, are quite complicated. They're multifactorial. There's a myriad of things involved in getting down to those. So what I'm going to propose tonight is that we start somewhere that everybody can get to. In terms of rearing percentage. So everybody can measure that. There's no excuse for any sheep producer not knowing how many ewes went to the ram and how many lambs they actually reared, either retained and or sold. I think we can all get to that. But having done my job for over 40 years, I do know that there's quite a bit of kidology in here, because the number of farms that I've gone onto in those years where I've asked what the rearing percentage is, and I'm given one figure at the beginning of the day, by the end of the day, I've wheedled out of everybody what the numbers are, and the two things are, the reality is actually very different. So the first thing I would say to you is that if you're looking at efficiency, is spend a bit of time knowing where you are and being honest with yourself as to where you actually are. You know, the rearing percentage is the number of ewes tupped to the number of lambs reared. It's that simple. But a lot of people get hung up on the scanning percentage, or they forget to have the empty ewes in, which we'll talk about in a minute. And what they're not looking at is the honest situation. You know, and just some simple figures. So 100 ewes, 155 lambs sold and retained is 155% reared. But the devil's in the detail, isn't it? Because how did we actually get to that figure? And if we understand that, then maybe we can look at where we can get some efficiency savings and improve that without having to go overboard and spend a lot more money, or bin the breed and start again, or whatever. So just very simply looking at that, you know, if they were actually, some people would say, well, I scanned at 195. Well, okay, but if you didn't have the empty ewes in that scanning, you actually scanned at 187. And then if you add 3% deaths in there before lambing, you're down to 181%. And then if you take 14% off of overall lamb losses, which is, I hate the word average, but it's the mode, which is a bit different to an average, that's when you get down to your 155. And already, you know, we can start to see that the devil is in the detail, in that if we understand some of those break points in there, and this is where your health plan starts to come in, we can begin to drill down and look at what we can do to stop some of this wastage, because that's what it is. It's wasted potential. So be honest. Where are you wasting potential? And in my experience, most flocks, when you really start looking at it, there are some small things that can be done that give you potentially quite big wins. So the main three contributing factors are lamb losses, of course, and I'm not going to delve into that tonight because I know that that Dan and Chris and JP will be talking about that in terms of what they do, and I'm going to leave that. I'm going to concentrate more on the ewes. So empty ewes, and I'm not calling them barren, because barren ewes actually a very rare thing. That means that she's non-breeding. For me, they're empty because it's our fault. Usually it's a management fault if we've got too many empty ewes and dead ewes. So I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 examples with those and drill that down to being productive. And this is the really efficiency factor, is how many of your ewes are actually producing lambs by the end of the season. By the time you wean, for 100 ewes, how many are actually productive? And this is an old graph that I've used for quite a long while, but she's still pretty good. It still really underlines this, so that if we have a 100 ewes in a flock, and that this is the number along the bottom that are actually productive, so they rear lambs, so they then either not empty, don't die, or manage to rear their lamb, that 1 or more lambs. Obviously, it's never going to be 100% because there are always going to be the odd loss on the way. But if you actually look at all the data sets I've had over the year, a huge number of flocks are down at the 86, 87 level by the time you get to weaning. And that, don't think too much notice in terms of the pounds profit on the left-hand side. Just think it's a straight line. It's a straight line. If I go from 86% productive up to 94, which is probably, you know, a reasonably aspirational target, I'm going to double the profit level in that flock. Simple as that. So let's just dispel this one for a start. It's an old graph, this. I couldn't find my really good one, so I've had to cobble this one together. But this is what a scanning actually looks like. There's huge data sets. We did a huge amount of work on this when we looked at fecunding back in the early 1980s. You know, if you take a scanning percentage and you plot the number of singles, twins, triplets, and you can see in the bottom there the quads starting to just creep in. This is what it looks like, unless you've used some hormones and you've gone a little bit out there, or you've got an Inverdale gene in there, then that doesn't actually apply. But for most of our breeds, you know, you can look at it and you can plot it. But what you've got to be careful of with scanning percentages, as I often say to my clients, you know, scanning is vanity, rearing is sanity. And, you know, the vanity there is to try and keep pushing scanning percentage up to get rearing percentage up. And very often what has is the opposite effect. And you can see why, because you're going up and up and up with more and more multiples, more cost, more labour, more percentage losses. So, you know, for many people, if you are looking at wanting, if you like, the sweet spot and you don't want to get into a huge number of multiples, then 180% gives you that equal number of triplets and singles, and the twins are at their actual optimum. That's not to say everybody should be aiming for that, but I think you need to have that in mind. Don't try bumping scanning percentages up in order to get rearing percentage without looking at some of the other factors, the other wastage factors. So what about these empty ewes at scanning then? If you were in the room with me, I'd be asking you now what you think is an acceptable percentage. The range is probably, well, more than 5% in some cases, but I would say that the normal range is probably 1 to 5%. But in all the surveys that I've done over the years, meetings, many people are prepared to accept 4 or 5% as the norm. And that is a massive loss in terms of potential. Whereas really, you know, what we ought to be aiming for is 1%. So the target of 1%, I would just ask you, what was your empty rate last year? And if I'm totally honest, you know, if you're not scanning and this is one of the really good reasons for scanning. If you don't know what your actual empty rate is at that point, it should be 1% or less if we've covered everything off. Now, okay, a lot of people won't reach that. There are people doing that, but certainly less than 2%. And I'll show you the impact of that in a minute. And there can be lots of reasons for it. So this is where your health plan comes in. You've got a higher empty rate. Is it toxoplasmosis? Have you had a problem with that? Are you vaccinating? Is it body condition? All sorts of things. But you then begin to ask the right questions. And similarly with dead ewes, you know, similar impact on rearing percentage as empty ewes. But as I'll show you in a little bit later on, the cost of a dead ewe to the flock is huge, and part of the process of health and well-being of a flock is to reduce the death rate as well, of course, vaccinations, whatever it is. The range probably somewhere between 2 and 6%. Causes, you name it, there are massive numbers of causes, but if you know and you're logging it and you know your death rate is higher than it really needs to be or should be, you can start to look for the reasons and start plugging the gaps. Might just be pushing your luck for an extra year, and we'll come and have a look at that just in a minute. But it also has a massive effect on replacement costs and replacement policy, because what it means is if a ewe dies, she's not giving you the choice of culling her out of the flock because she's not up to speed. She's forcing you to either not cull something that should be to try and keep your replacement rate down, or upping your replacement rate and it costing you a lot more money. So don't take too much notice of all of the detail on this, but because this just shows you how complicated it is to do a cost of production calculation. But I just want you to, I've got one before and one after, just to show you the impact of just reducing the empty rate by 3% at scanning and reducing your death rate by 3%. Now on 100 ewes at the 180, that would be another 9 lambs per 100 ewes. So here's our baseline. The important ones are at the top. We're rearing 1.5 at the moment at 19 kilos, so producing 28.5 kilos of carcass. And all of those other costs in this spreadsheet are just divided into that to give us unit cost of 525. And at the bottom, you can see with the figures I've used, a profit of £2.63 per ewe. Not that great. It is positive, at least. But if we add those extra 9 lambs in and we put the next one up, then you can see the profit has gone up to £16.84. And all I've done in terms of changing costs, I've made one little change, and that is to the replacement charge. I've gone from £22 per ewe, and you'll see why I've chosen that in a minute, to 16. So because we haven't had as many deaths basically, and we've been able to choose and be able to keep the rest of them more productive, that's the sort of impact we're talking about. So small wins, big differences, and it's the sort of thing that I think everybody can do, and it can be a really active part of health planning. So just developing that a little bit further then, before I hand over to the guys you really want to listen to, because they're going to talk about what they do. What does she really cost you? Do you really know what your replacement costs are and what the factors are and how you can manage it? For most people, I think the cost of replacements is the size of the cheque that you write out every autumn when you're buying in. Or if it's your own ewe lambs, you try and hide from it completely, but you should be honest that it's an opportunity cost, okay? But that's not the story, is it? That's not what a replacement charge is at all. What we're trying to do, if we want the best efficiency possible, is for the ewes to, and I've used 5 crops here as a fairly standard expectation, we need her to produce us 5 crops of lambs, rear them all, and as she then progresses through the 5 years, the margin that she leaves us at the end is a nice big fat one, okay? If at some stage she dies or she gets culled before that, then clearly her lifetime contribution is not going to be that great. But what does that look like in terms of what she costs us per year? So I've just done a little table here. I've said I've spent 170 quid on shearlings. Yeah, I suppose I would have spent that this year. And then I've looked at that shearling and thought, well, okay, let's look at her number of the years in the flock and what she actually realises at the end of it in terms of her residual value, her cull value, if you like. Or at the very far right of this, if she dies, she's 0 cost. And you could argue then that there ought to be another column which is a negative because we're going to have to pay to get rid of her as well. But I didn't think I'd go that far tonight because it didn't look very nice at all. But you can see there that, come back to that table another time if you want to, but just to show you. So we've got our ewe there that's been 5 years. She's got residual value of 90 quid. So she's a nice, big, fit, healthy ewe when we decide to get rid of her. Cull value at the right time. She's marketed. She's going to cost us £16 per year that she's in the flock for her replacement charge. Now, you could say, well, let's push it to 6. And then if you pushed it to 6, it would be £13.30. But the problem with that, of course, is unless you're really confident you're going to get 6, is that where you could most likely end up is she's going to be worth a bit less if you lose condition, her teeth start to go, she's not going to be worth the 90 quid. Even worse, she's worth 30, or even worse, the darn thing dies on you and she ends up costing you £28.30 for every year she was in the flock because we pushed our luck. And the difference is massive. So there's a really active replacement policy, and culling policy is an essential part of this efficiency when we're looking for it. And similarly with shearlings, and I've just got a little example to finish off with this, because here we have the most expensive animal that ever comes into the flock, of course, is the shearling that dies in the first year, because she costs you the whole whack of £170. But, you know, if we look at mastitis incidents, for example, in flocks, then we know that shearlings are the most prone to mastitis. And this is a flock structure from one of my clients' flocks from a few years ago now, but I've got quite a few years data on this particular flock. And what was happening was it was a very harsh, they were having to work very hard. And we were getting 16 to 18% loss between shearling and 2 shear. The shearlings were going at that sort of rate. And that isn't that unusual if you start looking at things in detail. And what it was doing, of course, was it was driving that flock to keep older ewes to try and keep the number up. The boss wouldn't let us have too big a check. We couldn't just go out and buy as many as we wanted. So it was forcing in a very hard system to keep some older ewes. And it was driving up the replacement cost out of sight because those shearlings were very expensive. So what we did was, this is 4 years, year 1 up to year 4, was to tackle those problems. And the 2 things specifically were ewe health and condition, so that we were looking more to get better condition on the ewes before they came in, so they weren't hammered so hard in lactation, but particularly the shearlings. The shearlings were kept separate, they were fed more, they were fed longer in early lactation, and you can just see the impact of that on the flock structure from that point of view. So in year 1, you can see that really stretched out horrible thing where lots and lots of shearlings coming in and then them not making it through, a lot of them to year 2 and 3, a big loss rate, very spread out age structure, up to year 4 here, where we've got the balance, where we're not losing so many shearlings between years 1 and 2, and the impact there on the replacement charge was massive, and also the impact on the empty rate and so on. We got that flock down to just under 1% empty at scanning on a regular basis, and scanning at about 205% year on year. And that was really by having that information on age structure, by taking notice of it, by understanding how much it was costing us, both money and output. And you know, I think it's an area where we shy away from because it's a little bit more complicated at times, but you know, to be able to do that, I think is important. So replacements, it's not about replacement rate. So again, I think when it comes to efficiency, don't be fooled into thinking that every figure that people quote at you is useful. Replacement rate is not a useful measure of efficiency within a flock. What's a useful measure is whether or not the ewes are productive. So I could show you sets of figures from flocks where the replacement rate is very high, but what they're doing is they're turning their ewes over early, and they're making the best residual value possible, selling some of them on as breeding stock and making good value and keeping the costs down, the productivity up. Other people will have a much lower rate and they're concentrating in other directions. But don't be fooled into thinking that replacement rate in itself is useful comparison between flocks. It's your own thing, your own, and understanding it that matters. So we want a maximum number of productive ewes. The turnover is almost irrelevant, providing it's not a turnover that's being driven by lots of deaths and lots of culling for things like lameness, all those things that we can do things about. It's about pulling all of those things together. Residual value is critical. So residual value of these breeding ewes is one of the most important factors in terms of keeping this cost. And replacement cost is usually the single biggest variable cost any flock carries, the single biggest in most cases. And you saw that in those spreadsheets that I showed you earlier. And have a proactive culling policy. And I know when JP and I talked the other day that I'm sure this is something that the guys are going to talk about. So Matt, in summary then, Mr. Chairman, I'll just summarise where I was. I hope I haven't complicated things too much, but I think hopefully that's a fairly good start to a week of where we're talking about health and welfare. Find an efficiency factor that you can measure. That's the important thing. You've got to be able to measure it and decide your priorities. There's no point in following some flight of fancy and then find, well, I can't actually measure that and make anything of it. Find some time spend a bit of time finding out honestly where you are. Be honest with yourself, because you are only fooling yourself. So your empty rate and so on, what are they and what can you do about them? How are you going to achieve it? We'll hear some more about that, how the guys that we've got on tonight have been achieving some of these things, and monitor your progress. Know your age structure of your flock. Okay, it's a bit of a pain to do, but you know, use different management coloured tags for each year so it makes life easy for you. But I promise you, if you understand what's happening to the age flock structure in your flock, you will understand a lot more about what's going on in this wastage factor. And don't underestimate the impact of small wins. I hope I demonstrated that a little bit with just those two things in that that spreadsheet for my made-up sheepfold farm. You know, don't get romanced by things that sound good. Stick with the things that you know you can measure, and have a proactive culling policy. Don't overlook it, because it will make a massive difference. And I know that, you know, there's been lots of work done on carbon emissions and so on, saying that, you know, the productivity of a ewe's lifetime is one of the single most biggest factors in terms of carbon emissions from that flock. And it's not just about longevity, it is about her productive life. So Matt, I will stop at that point and hand over to you and to JP.
Thank you very much, Lesley. You've given us some really good pointers on how and where to start if we're looking to improve efficiency in the flock. So while JP gets his slides in order, I will just quickly introduce him. JP graduated from Cambridge in 2010, and after starting in mixed practice in the Scottish Highlands, undertook a residency in farm animal medicine at Edinburgh Vet School. He gained a European specialist in small ruminant health management in 2016, and he's currently working at Larkmead Vet Group, doing mainly first opinion, large animal work, but also teaches at the Royal Vet College London, Cambridge Vet School, and Tartu in Estonia. And with JP tonight, we have Dan Marriott, who is a first-generation farmer, previously based in Wiltshire, where he established a self-replacing flock of 3,000 Romneys with multiple landlords, both conventional and organic. He's recently moved to Herefordshire to start a new tenancy breeding ex-Lano wool shedding sheep alongside his Romneys, and also rearing 400 dairy beef calves each year. And we have Chris Beckwith, who is the livestock manager at Berkshire College of Agriculture. So over to you, JP.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Following Lesley Stubbings is always a tough gig, trying to live up to that. But it's a great introduction to I guess one of the reasons why we have health plans. I've entitled this talk "Health Plans: What Are They Good For?" Because it's always good to be a wee bit skeptical about things that are presented to us. So. That's not right. Why is my slides not moving on? Oh, here we are. So what we're going to cover is what is a health plan, why you should have it, why I was skeptical, and then what I include in my health plans. And I'll actually let the I guess the people who actually are the end users of the health plans, you know, two of my clients, talk about what they think are good about health plans, how they've helped them with their flocks. So what is a health plan? You know, it's a written or computerized document. It should aid the farmer or stock person in managing the health and welfare of the sheep. And importantly, it should aid them in achieving their production aims for the flock. So everything that Lesley was talking about, which is important in efficiency, the health plan should help you to achieve that. So it needs to be specific to the individual farm. It needs to be practical and easy to use. I try not to let them get too big. If it's really enormous, it's hard to use. It needs to be kept up to date. It needs to focus on and highlight particular areas for that farm, and it should change with time as the farm changes. And importantly, it needs to be agreed between whoever's producing the health plan, myself as a vet, and the client and the farmer, so that everybody has agreed that they're going to implement this. And it's particularly important if you've got, say, an owner, a farm manager, and a shepherd, and then me as the vet. We really want to have everybody involved in this, so that everyone agrees that these changes take place. And lastly, what the advice that's in it must be good. It must reflect good farm management, must reflect good health advice, good welfare advice. So these documents here are taken from this paper by Atkinson and Neal. So why have a health plan? There's room for improvement in sheep farming, as Lesley's already highlighted, compared to other types of farming. It tends to generate less income across, you know, okay, it's 2017 data now, but you know, across a whole range of countries, sheep and goat farms tend to lag behind the farm average here. And we see things like, you know, maybe low levels of modernization, or lack of information or training, and animal diseases, things like that. So here's some UK data. Again, it's maybe a little old. The figures have probably only gone up, but we see that in terms of these endemic diseases that are present within the national flock, you know, look at the costs we're seeing there. And as Lesley said already, you know, a healthy flock is an efficient flock. dealing with these diseases is going to increase our efficiency, and obviously having some guidance to do that would seem to be a sensible way of improving it. So our flock health plan's the solution. Well, there's this, if you look that up, you find this 2007 paper by some really eminent sheep vets who say that, yeah, there is, there's no convincing evidence that increased scientific knowledge has actually been translated into improving welfare conditions or improving productivity in the majority of sheep flocks. And they suggest that health plans might be a way to do that. And actually various industry bodies have also are also of the opinion that health plans are going to help with that. We think Red Tractor, okay, back in 2017, they're then saying, oh, you need this written annual health and performance review. Okay, lots of farm assurance and accreditation bodies say they want that veterinary involvement in that health plan. And now those of you who've signed up for the animal health and welfare pathway, obviously the animal health and welfare review is a requirement for that. So all well and good. Lots of people think that a health plan would be the way of improving it. So why was I a bit skeptical about them? And this is possibly a result of veterinary training or what have you, but I was there just thinking, well, where's the evidence? Show me where farms having health plans has actually resulted in better animal health, better animal welfare, but better productivity. And do you know what? I found precious little out there. And that's backed up by other people. Where, again, that same Atkinson and Neil paper, they're saying, well, lots of farms have got plans, but not valued. The records are available, but the accuracy is poor. And as Lesley said already, there's often holes there in what we know. The reviewing of the plan or the records is very limited. So the same plan just gets used year after year. Maybe farmers are not aware of the problems. And some of it is this. This is, I guess you might say, the very traditional approach, whether this is a difficult lambing or an outbreak of some disease on the farm. You, as a farmer, see that there's a problem. You call me, I fix the problem, and hopefully you pay me. Now, with stuff on the flock level, you recognise there's a problem. You call me, I provide the advice. Farmers then need to act on the advice. Then the problem is fixed, hopefully, and then you pay us. Gets a little bit more tricky when we start to really get into flock health plans, where we start to look at the data and we start to decide that I think that there might be a problem. First, I've got to persuade you that there might be a problem. We've got to investigate it, find out actually what's behind all of this, and then we still have that thing of having to provide the advice. That advice needs to be implemented, and then hopefully then the problem is fixed or improved. So there are many more steps in here, and communication becomes much more key for this. And various people looking at sheep farming have talked about the barriers that might exist here. Sheep farmers consider sheep farming is complex and their farm is unique, and that they themselves are the experts to manage the flock. And another study looked at the time that vets spend in an advisory role with sheep, and they're finding that motivation. So does the vet want to do it? Capability. Are they capable of doing it? Do they know enough? And factor 3, opportunity. And the opportunity, the chance of actually having clients say, hey, as a vet, please, could you get involved and offer some advice here? That has the biggest impact on the time we as vets spend on flock health in general, and maybe flock plans in particular. And you get quotes like this from vets. And maybe part of that is that we as vets maybe have problems with that. We're maybe very familiar with being asked to fix a problem here and now right in front of us, and maybe less so with advising in a more proactive fashion. So do health plans do what the promoters claim they do? And for many years, there's been little evidence that they do make a difference. I did manage to find somebody who had actually looked at it. So this was Paul Crawford, who'd looked at sheep farms in Northern Ireland, and the only correlation they found between desired behaviors relating to animal health and welfare and productivity and having a health plan was whether or not cases of foot rot were treated promptly with injectable antibiotics, and unfortunately the association was negative. So farmers who had health plans were actually less likely to do the correct thing. So not great. And Crawford and the other authors on that paper thought that maybe part of the problem here was that farmers saw the health plan as a static physical document, and they, the perceptions of the value of that health plan, the quality of it varied, and it wasn't really being implemented. And the vets in turn felt restricted by inadequate or incomplete flock production data, lack of confidence in the accuracy of farm records. You're seeing a lot of callbacks here, things that Lesley has spoken about already, about actually knowing what's going on in your farm. And this is causing vets to think, well, maybe they failed to address critical issues. Okay, now, there are actually some, a little bit of contrary data here. So there's a student project that I was actually the supervisor for that also happened to look at Northern Ireland sheep farmers. And that one actually did find that there was a positive correlation between having a veterinary written health plan and regular body condition scoring, which Lesley has already highlighted as being important here, vaccinating against clostridial disease, pasteurellosis, and abortion agents, and more responsible use of antimicrobials. So bit of evidence the other way. And then this PhD thesis, admittedly it's a long time ago, admittedly it's Australia, incredible benefits found there. 714% cost benefit, 8.6% increase in profitability over 3 years. But it's worth bearing in mind that what they were looking at there was several visits a year and investigations and analysis rather than just a plan. And that ongoing engagement rather than just a plan is going to become a key part of this. So as I say, the other problems here is that maybe vets get it wrong. There's plenty of evidence out there, mainly from the dairy sector, that sometimes what vets think farmers really want and what farmers actually really want are maybe not quite the same thing, and therefore how we approach it maybe could be improved. So what should be included in a health plan here? So it needs to deal with common diseases. No point having things in there for things that are vanishingly rare, not likely to happen. We need to have something where control eradication is going to afford obvious animal welfare benefits or obvious economic benefits to the producer, and most of the time both. We improve animal health and animal welfare, usually productivity goes up. We need the disease or infections to be well researched. We need to have some practical treatments available, and ideally it would want to be something where we can verify the compliance, because then we can see whether or not the health plan is working. So as a baseline, and I would say in my experience, this is probably the bit of the health plan which is most valued by people who are new to keeping sheep, are treatment guidelines for common conditions. So this is this condition, this is what it looks like, this is how to treat it. But in that section, I will usually also include a little bit of advice about prevention. And then a calendar for flock health interventions. When should scanning be? When should the rams go in? When should the rams come out? When should you be body condition scoring? When should you be fecal sampling for worm egg counts in your lambs? When do vaccines need to be given to keep, to have a plan there to ensure that these things get done. And then we get into the thing where I think it really does start to make a difference, especially maybe to more experienced farmers as well. A record of the flock aimed, numbers and breed. That is so that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, my colleagues in the practice could take over some of my clients, and looking at the health plan could know the sort of farm that they're dealing with. And then we get into those key production, key productivity indicators, call them what you will. They will vary from farm to farm. And as Lesley has already pointed out, there's no point picking one that is not going to give us useful information, either because we don't have good quality data to back it up, or because it's not actually relevant to productivity. So I'm in full agreement. Rearing percentage is a great place to start. And then I start to ask questions about what is the MDU rate? What is the scanning percentage, the lambing percentage, the head counts of lambs at first vaccination, second vaccination, weaning, things like that, because then we start to pull out things like mortality, when's it high, things like that. And then the key thing, I think, as well, is a farm-specific action plan of key points. So, all right, we've spoken about all of this, but specifically what is changing? And that is something that then for farms where I review it every year, something I always do is, these are the key points from last year. How did those go? Must be individual to the farm. Must be individual to the farm, must be tailored to the farm. Maybe back in the day when textbooks were very expensive and there was no internet, reproducing something that was generic was fine. Okay, maybe it was helpful to some people. But now, you know, if a farmer wants to know generic advice about vaccinations, you know, you can Google it. It's a specific advice to the farm. That's what's really key about it. A good place to start sometimes with farms is like a single issue one. So single control plan, which is wanted and is followed, is far better than a complete flock health plan that's never used. If a farmer approaches me about a single issue I know is already engaged and motivated, it's already come to me, it's easier to produce, it's easier to follow, it's easier to measure success. So here are several I've made over the years. I think the most useful thing about the health plan, and I look forward to Chris and Dan maybe telling me I'm wrong about this, but I think it's the discussion period, the time where we're actually doing the health plan. If you as a farmer are in the habit of saying to the vet, I need a health plan, and then disappearing off, you know, send it out to me, you're not going to get anything very good out of it. The discussion period, it's easier to communicate successfully face to face. It's better for us to transfer knowledge to you. It's better for us to check that we're on the same page with things. It's much better for you to tell us what actually is your problem, what actually is going on. It helps us build rapport. If we're going to work together, we need to trust each other. We need to know where we're coming from. And as I say, I think it's the most useful part of the whole thing. So 3 key questions that kind of underline and underlie my health plans. I'm going out to do a health plan. I ask, what does the farmer or shepherd want to improve? Okay. And what are their problems as they see it? And then I want to see the data. Okay. So I will send out, before I go out and do a health plan, I will send you know, data collection forms to my farmers. And they're really interesting, as Lesley pointed out already, because I have one which is productivity related. So used to the TUP, lambs scanned, lambs born, you know, lambs weaned, lambs reared or retained, you know, lambs reared, so sold or retained, you know, ewes that died, things like that. And then I'll also have, because I'm a vet and this is a health plan, I'll also have a disease, morbidity, mortality thing. So how many cases of these diseases did you have? How many died? You know, do we have veterinary diagnoses for these, or are these just farmer diagnoses? And what's really interesting is I can get a very different number of dead sheep from one and the other. So the more information I have, the better advice that I can give. So those are what I want. What does the farmer or shepherd want to improve, and what are the problems as they see it? And then what's the data saying? And if they're in agreement, that's great. And if they're not in agreement, we need to tease that out. So then, how does the actual finished document look then? I have a cover page, any known disease problems, any accreditation statuses. Basically, as I say, that's if I get hit by a bus, can my colleagues keep offering a good standard of service to these clients? And then there's the data review section. Known disease statuses. If we know we've got a disease problem with this or that on the farm, we want to have it in there. Morbidity, mortality review, productivity review, growth rates review, and after each one I'll have a comment section where we say, well, look, this is much improved compared to last year, but that's got worse, or well, look, this is high, I really need more information about you know, why it is in those ways. And then antibiotic usage review as well, the calendar, and then some standard operating procedures. All right, so nutrition, key management time points, so weaning, pre-mating, scanning, pre-lambing, things like that. Key procedures, so what's the farm's policy on castrating, tail docking, ear tagging, intervention at lambing time, you know, gloves mandatory, always use lube, hygiene, gentle, things like that. Treatment of common conditions, and then a worm control plan, an abortion control plan, chronic wasting diseases control plan, and a lameness control plan. Some of these might get more emphasis on some farms than others, and if a farm has a particular problem with a disease that isn't on that list, obviously it will get one as part of that, but it's they'll all be tailored to that farm itself. Quarantine guidance, and then some things that tend to actually be quite true across lots of them: record of farmer training, biosecurity guidance, and what I tend to term legislation guidance. So broken needles, welfare, transport, what animals may not be transported, the guidance on identification, emergency slaughter, euthanasia, who on the farm is capable of doing it, what methods are they using, and that just helps keep you right in knowing what's going on. It also helps keep the any auditing bodies happy as well. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to two of my, well, Dan's a former client of mine because he's now moved away over to Herefordshire, but to Dan and Chris to talk about actually what they find useful about health plans. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. Quite comprehensive there. Just a reminder, as you're going along, please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll put them to the panel at the end of the session. So I think we'll go to Dan first.
Good evening.
Over to you, Dan.
So we came across JP when we were farming in Wiltshire. Basically, we'd had 2 health plans prior to JP's that had basically just been generic, printed off the internet jobs. And being a farmer that likes to get value for money, we weren't too happy that we were getting bang for our buck from our health plan. So we were looking for a vet that would do what JP has said he was going to do. Basically, he would tailor a health plan to our farm. He would give us advice, and it could then help us improve our profitability. The big win for us was doing his health plan, following his health plan. Identified that we were losing too many lambs post weaning. Being on the edge of the Savanac forest, we were getting a lot of misty, pneumonia-y type weather, and by ensuring our lambs were covered by the vaccine for the main sort of stress period of weaning, we were able to reduce our losses and increase our routing percentage, which was a big win. And the other big benefit we got from the health plan is on the standard operating procedures. We were able to give our staff and myself and my wife, who look after the sheep, use it a lot as well, which is when you find a sheep and it's got whatever condition, you can refer straight away to your standard operating procedures, and you know what to give it, what to do in the heat of battle, and saves a phone call to the vet or a vet's call out fee. So again, it was helping bottom line of our business, and they were the big wins for us of health plans.
Thanks, Dan. And moving forward, you've obviously moved over to Hereford. Are you continuing with the same kind of program? Have you extended it into the calf rearing as well?
Yep. So we're moving up into Herefordshire. We've engaged with 2 specialist vets. One vet practice that specialises in calf rearing, and they're following a similar practice for us on the health plan for the calves. And then we've got a sheep specialist who was able to take on JP's health plan and tailor it for our new farm, and so we can implement the same policy up here.
Mm-hmm. Question for you, Dan, as we go along. What did you actually do to reduce the lamb losses? What was the change that you made?
So we adjusted the time that we were vaccinating the lambs with OVVAC, so that they were all covered for Pastorella for the main stress period over weaning. Previously, we'd either been giving it too early, so the cover was waning by the autumn time, or we'd been giving it too late and they weren't fully covered over the weaning period. And it was the drilling down into when the mortality was occurring that allowed us to identify that management policy wasn't quite on point.
Yeah, so as Lesley said earlier, the devil's often in the detail. Yeah,
very much so, very much so.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. I'll hand over to Chris now.
Hello. So I think it's fair to say that when JP came along to be our vet, we're probably in a little bit of a pickle. So historically, we did have a flock health plan, but it was a generic sort of thing. And to be honest, we were having a job to get it updated. So yeah, JP came along and obviously helped us deal with that. I think what I like about them is that when you're sat there and you're actually in the office and you're talking about the flock and everything else, it forces you to be honest with yourself, really, and have those awkward conversations and pull up the data, which generally, yeah, it isn't quite right. And then I really love about having it is that the fact that anyone can walk into your office, they can pick it up, they know what you should be doing and when you should be doing it. Again, you've got your standard operating procedures in there, so anyone knows how to deal with an issue. And yeah, I think that you know, it does highlight your problems, and it does push you into a corner to make it better for next year. Otherwise, you've got to then explain to your vet why you haven't. So from that point of view, I think they're value for money, definitely.
Thanks, Chris. We've got a couple of, well, one specific question before we go on to the general Q&A for both of you, really, is how are you recording and managing your data collection so that you can review it when JP puts you on the spot? Okay,
so in our case, it's quite easy, actually. We just keep everything on a spreadsheet anyway. So every single sheep is on that spreadsheet, and then any issues that sheep has are on the spreadsheet. So from that point of view, you know, for us, we can go back and check on any animal for any issues.
Yeah. And Dan, are you using any software for recording, or is it all in the diary?
So, well, we use technology, but it's not software. We basically have set up WhatsApp groups so that anyone that's working the sheep can record anything that's done, and that can then all be reviewed in the office and the paperwork updated. Everyone has a smartphone nowadays, and it's easy for anyone who's helping at the weekend or during the week just to update the group with whatever they've done to the sheep, if something's died, what it's died from, and that then gives us the data. Even if it's not written down at the time, we can review the WhatsApps and update JP or whichever vet of what's actually happened.
That's a good one, actually. Especially when you've got more than yourself involved. If there's other people helping out, having some way of easy communication that everybody can tag on to.
Yeah, so we just keep diaries, a diary in the main area where the sheep are, or where we're working out of, and everything gets written in that anyway, and then it'll all get transferred onto this spreadsheet. Okay, very good. All right, I think if we'll bring Lesley and JP back in now, there's a couple of questions in the question box already. If there's anything else that sparked your interest, please chuck it in the box now, and we'll set to. So first question from Jeremy here is, I guess this goes back to Lesley, really, looking at replacement costs. Is there much difference between a closed flock and
a flock that buys in all the time in how you'd calculate or manage your replacement costs?
The short answer is no. How you calculate it and monitor it is the same. And actually, in terms of real cost, there's probably not a lot of difference either. Again, if you're honest with yourself. So, I mean, absolutely a closed flock from a health point of view. I'm sure JP is going to vote for that all the time because, of course, the health risks are so much less. So, in terms of efficiency and productivity, there are definitely potential gains there because you're running a much lower risk. In pure financial terms for the replacement charge, again, be honest, that ewe lamb that you keep, you should put in on the books, on the valuation, charge yourself, if you like, into the system what she would have been worth on the market, the opportunity cost. And unfortunately, you know, people quite often fall into the trap because if you're keeping your own replacements in a closed flock, you are taking on a very large responsibility for choosing the right replacements. And I see all too often people, you know, they wait until they get to post-weaning when all the best ewe lambs have already gone because they were worth a lot of money. And then they start keeping ewe lambs back from the bottom half. And that is a recipe for disaster. I can see Chris nodding there, you know, and it's human nature, isn't it, Chris? I mean, it's the sort of thing that we would all do. So there is quite a lot to be gained from running a close flock, but it's a lot of work. And I think to do that these days and do it really successfully, you want to be using the technology in terms of recording, you know, looking at the growth rates very seriously deciding which ones to keep and which not to keep. Yeah, don't go into it lightly. If you go into it with your eyes wide open and you're prepared to do it properly, then there are gains to be made. But it won't be cheaper actually on a per ewe basis. You still got the same factors. Yeah.
I guess the real benefit is you get the choice if you select them early enough.
Yes. You must always select them at the first choice, you know, mark up mark up a lot more than you actually want to keep in the end so you can whittle them down by the time you actually make the final selection. Don't wait until too late and then you're left with the ones that you really didn't want.
And Dan and Chris, are you, Dan, you're still breeding most of your own replacements?
Yeah, I've been a closed flock for nearly 10 years.
Yeah.
And everything is home saved, as it were. Because I don't trust that other people will have done the work that Lesley suggests should be done. Just because you're buying sheep in a sheep sale doesn't mean that someone else has done that. They might have just stuffed them full of cake, or whatever else they've done to get them up to spec. So I prefer to do the work and take that responsibility myself.
Yep. And when do you have your first selection round for your replacement females? At what age do you start picking?
Once we've got the 8-week weight data.
So really early on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our ewe lambs, we would select our ewe lambs before we even consider selling anything.
Yeah. So you get first draw and then you sell what you don't want. Yeah. Chris, are you buying in or homebred?
Not anymore. We haven't bought any in for probably 2 or 3 years now. So yeah, we are keeping our own replacements, but we don't fatten. We sell everything in the stores anyway. But yeah, we tend to sort of pull ours out before we do anything else. So yeah, we're picking the best of what we've got. We'll try, well, hopefully anyway.
Yeah, that's it. Early selection.
Matt, can I stick my oar in at this stage?
Of course you can, Jan.
And ask, well, Lesley and all the guys really, about the thorny question, which I always did a lot of, was breeding from ewe lambs.
Yeah, I think that was in the Q&A as well, Jan. Yeah,
where they fit on your graph, Lesley.
Yeah, I you know, I mean, again, ewe lambs, breeding from ewe lambs, it can be, you know, a big improvement to productivity of a ewe over a lifetime. But if you don't do it right, it will have absolutely the opposite effect. So for me, I've got some clients who do, some clients who don't, and it's very much down to individual circumstances. You know, you've got to treat them separately, You've got to look after them. If you don't do that, you're going to end up with a shielding that's below par and is never going to, you know, we know, for example, if we look at all the data from the KPI project, we know that ewe lambs and shieldings that don't grow properly, don't hit their growth targets, are not as productive for their lifetime. So potentially, again, yep, you know, I mean, if you go the Kiwi way, if you put them as two as ewe hoggets and they don't breed, they're down the road. I think we're quite at that level for most people, but done right is potential. But for a lot of people, particularly in a lot of commercial flocks, you know, you've also got to be careful in that by the time the shepherds have lambed 3,000 or 4,000 ewes, do they really want to lamb a batch of ewe lambs and do it properly? Horses for courses. Some can, some can't.
Yep. I think that answers that one quite nicely, Lesley. We've got one more from Christoph. Comment was, Christoph likes your comments on disciplined culling strategy for ewes. Where accelerated systems are used, would you use chronological age or parity for your cull benchmark?
Very good question. We don't come across many accelerated systems in this country anymore, but I think with the accelerated system, it's more a question of, is that you fitting into it? Is she playing the game? Because if she isn't and she's slipping around and not doing it, then I think it comes back to possibly culling quite a few earlier and realizing that residual value. Because the slippage on an accelerated system is where the wastage comes in. In my experience, gosh, I haven't really dealt with one for a lot of years, but I used to do a lot of AI and so on in them. So yeah, some do, some don't, but I suspect it's slightly different wastage reconciliation that you would use.
There's a question there about vaccines, so I'll just answer if that's all right.
Yeah,
Matt.
Sure.
So someone's asking, when is the best time to ovivac to ensure there's protection for weaning? And my opinion on this is, if I don't have any farm specific data or anything like that to go on, just general advice would be 4 weeks and 8 weeks. And the rationale for that is this: we know that the passive immunity, so the antibodies that are acquired from the colostrum by the lamb, give protection for around about 10 to 12 weeks against Clostridial disease. Against Pasteurella, it's gone by about 3 weeks. So if we give the first dose at 4 weeks and the second dose at 8 weeks, then we don't end up with a sort of immunity gap, if you like, between when the maternally derived antibodies have faded away and the lamb's own antibodies deriving from vaccination have reached a protective level. So in order to avoid preventable losses, you know, for example, due to pulpy kidney in that sort of immunity gap area, then I would say 4 weeks and 8 weeks, because then by about 10 weeks, the lambs are, you know, have produced the protective levels of their own antibodies. So as a general rule, I'd go there. And then on farms that have had problems with pneumonia in the autumn, especially where the lambs are born sort of slightly earlier, so if we're talking sort of March lambing, something like that, we know that the immunity to Pasteurella components from Ovivac or Heptavac or what have you fade faster. So sometimes I'll recommend a boost Pasteurella only vaccine, so Ovipast, in the sort of late summer, early autumn. So time it for about 3 weeks or so before you think that the risk shoots up. So if that's a move on to cover crops, or obviously trying to predict when the weather is going to break is very difficult, but around about then. You also asked about 1 or 2 doses, always 2 doses, because it's an activated vaccine. You give 1 dose, to be honest, in my opinion, I wouldn't bother. Save your money. All right, either give 2 doses and protect them, or don't. Would you agree, Matt, as somebody from the...
Absolutely, yeah. A single dose of that kind of vaccine is a complete waste of time. So follow the instructions on the packet, use the product as stated, and you'll get good results. And you know, if you're having specific problems, as JP says, adjust your timings to suit. But always with that kind of vaccine, need a primary course of 2 doses the right time apart. Otherwise, neither one does you any good. And then you can follow up with annual boosters if required. We've had one more question come in, again for Lesley. What do you base your opportunity cost of replacement on?
Very good question. Okay, you can look at it 2 ways. You could say that it's worth what that ewe lamb would be worth to sell as breeding stock, but a slightly different connotation, and I think the more honest one, is what would it cost you to buy that ewe lamb in, if you were buying it in, because that then puts the onus on you that you're hopefully getting really good quality. So what I'm really saying is don't underestimate it. The opportunity cost is what you could either sell it for or what you would pay to buy it in, and be honest. It's not just a store lamb price, because you haven't reared just a store lamb. You're rearing your next generation and your next level of productivity.
Just on that, Lesley, though, would you not need to subtract from that the fact that you don't need to put in place any of the quarantine procedures that you would do if you bought it in?
Yeah,
so
you could take those costs off. Yeah, I mean, the actual animal itself, but then of course you are saving on not having to go through that quarantine and so on. So you have got those health benefits. Absolutely, JP. Yeah, but you know, even if you're saving ewe lambs and running them around to be shearlings, don't underestimate what it's going to cost to run a ewe lamb round to be a shearling, even if you are going to do them dry. Again, be honest. You know, it's upwards of 30 quid at least. So you know, you can have them in your valuation. That will go in your replacement charge, and the appreciation of a ewe lamb to a shearling will reduce your replacement charge if you get it right. So you know that there are benefits from that as well.
Okay.
Matt, could I just put a question to JP, please?
Absolutely.
In regards to the pathway and how that might help people, just for those that might not be aware of it, for health planning, and then this vet attestation that we've all got to watch out for, JP, in December, if you just want to take that up.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm not been involved in the design of these things at all. But yeah, so the animal health and welfare pathway, basically, I mean, if you want to sign up for it, you basically need to have previously been in receipt of your of BPS, and it is the threshold in terms of number of stock is very small. I think it's 21 or 22 sheep, so it's not very many. Would make you eligible for it. And then basically what you have to do is you sign up for it and they accept you onto the scheme, and then you have to have an animal health and welfare review with a vet, and you need to do testing for anthelmintic resistance, and then basically, as the vet doing it, I have to then provide you with a certificate, if you like, saying I have done the animal health and welfare review, and you have done the testing for anthelmintic resistance, and the results, the findings were as follows. Here is this was the lab that did it. This is the lab's reference number as well. And once they've got that, that's fine. As part of the animal health and welfare review, they expect you to look at at least two of welfare, biosecurity, antibiotic usage, and then obviously the area that they asked you to look at, which in sheep is anthelmintic resistance. So all I've done is basically bolt that on to my existing health plan. I actually had a little bit of a redesign of the basic structure of my health plan now, so it sits in 3 parts. One part which is basically the calendar, the SOPs, and the sort of biosecurity and legislation guidance. One section which has got all the productivity and morbidity mortality reviews, because those are required for red tractor farm assurance. So they're in a section, and then the front section, which would be the animal health and welfare review, antibiotic usage review, and the sort of the agreed key points, because they have to be in there for that section anyway. So that's, I guess, how I've adapt what I do to take that into account. And so once you've provided the evidence to DEFRA that you've done that, then they pay you. And I can't remember the precise figure off the top of my head. It's about £450. And when I costed it out, that basically is the cost of a visit, a health plan, and then the visits and time to do the anthelmintic resistance testing. So they did their homework when they worked out how much money they were going to give you. I don't think you'll make a lot of money out of doing the animal health and welfare pathway, but as hopefully we've established this evening, these are good things to do anyway. At least you're getting paid back for it.
£436. It's 20 ewes is the minimum number, I think, and we are promised, and Dan Phipps back me up on this, that it will extend to other than those with BPS, though, because there are obviously a lot of particularly young sheep keepers who run sheep here, there and everywhere who don't claim BPS, and it is supposedly going to be extended to them, I think, early next year, is it not, Dan?
Yeah, and then it also goes into the endemic disease program it follows into next year.
Follow-on question for JP on that one. What should we be expecting to pay for flock health planning advice? Are farmers generally expecting to spend too little? That maybe goes to Lesley as well, actually.
Yeah, I would probably prefer to send it to Lesley, to be honest. Obviously, I'd love to say that all farmers are spending too little and should spend much, much more on my time. But I think the thing to look at it is, don't look at it like a cost, look at it like an investment. That I can't talk for every practice. I can only talk for what we charge. But basically, we have a fixed price that covers an hour on farm and getting the written document back. I almost always find that even though I make it very clear, especially to first-time people, that if we go over the hour, I'm afraid I'm going to have to bill you the extra time. I've never had anybody throw me out at the hour mark yet. So I think once the discussion gets going, I think it is seen that it is valuable. So yeah, that would be my general things. I don't want to sort of get into exactly how much I bill for health plans and things. I don't think this would be an appropriate venue for that.
No, and I think that the point there is, before I pass it on to Lesley, is that we should be viewing this as consultancy advice, the same as if you are growing crops, you would employ your agronomist to give you specialist advice on how to grow the vegetables properly. So yeah, anything to add, Lesley?
Well, I think just that, I mean, JP said it, think of it as an investment. I showed you some figures earlier on as to how much more money you can make per ewe with tweaking this and tweaking that, small wins. And providing when you set this thing up, it's a living, breathing document like the ones that JP works with Dan and with Chris. At the end of the year, I'm sure these guys will agree, if they'd like to comment, you can actually see the benefit. You can see the benefit many times over. I think you both alluded to that anyway. And that's the key thing for both the vet and the farmer. Make sure you set it up so that at the end of the year, you can both see the benefit. And then that's the great investment.
I mean, yeah, I would just, I'll butt in a little bit there. Even if you sit there and say it's £300 for JP to sit in your office for an hour and go through and do a health plan, it's not anywhere near that, by the way. At the end of the day, if that increases your productivity by a small margin, it's £300 well spent. So to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'd agree. You haven't got to increase your productivity very much to pay for it. If you're red tractor assured, it's something you have to do anyway. So therefore, you may as well look to extract the most value out of that. And the one thing I would say is find a vet you can work with. there's no point in just signing up to your local vets if the person they send out doesn't know much about sheep or isn't that interested in sheep. You find someone that you can work with and you can have a good conversation with, and then you'll get a far more value out of the process.
Sorry, I just realised I didn't answer Dan's question about the veterinary attestations, where I would regard the fact that you're going to have one. So if you do the animal health and welfare pathway, that will count as a veterinary attestation, or if you're red tractor assured, that will count. If not, from the 13th of December, you will have to have a veterinary attestation. So a vet will have to come out and sign saying, well, I've seen the holding. Do be aware if you've got multiple sites connected to the same CPH number, then you see all of them. I've seen the holding, I've seen the animals, and basically, you know, there are not major problems here. It's because things may go on for further export and to the EU, and the EU now requires that this is done. So those who are listening from you know, from overseas, from other EU countries, will be familiar with these veterinary attestations. They're having them as well. What I'd say is, don't regard it as a, you know, try and, if you rarely have the vet out, don't try and push it as a push the vet around the farm as quickly as possible, sign the bit of paper and get lost, please. Say, look, I have to pay for the visit already. I've paid for him to be on the farm. This is your opportunity to ask some of those questions. Ask away. Those of us who are sheep keen vets, we are really very keen. Nobody sheep vets for the glory, right? We do it because we're really, really keen about it. So ask us.
The only thing just to add to that, JP, is that in order to export, we'll have to have this attestation, and everybody should think in terms of their sheep might need to be exported, or part of it. So although it might not be the main cuts, it's likely that some of it will need to be exported. So it's very critical that everybody's aware of this and covers that by the 13th of December. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I think we've exhausted all the questions in the chat and the question box. I will hand back to Jan.
I don't know if I was quite expecting that, but here I am nevertheless. Again, having welcomed everybody, I guess it now falls me to thank everybody for all their efforts this evening, to Dan for saying a few kind words at the start, Matt for his excellent chairing of our activities this evening, to Lesley, who gave us a lot to think about, I think, and if even one or two recalcitrant sheep farmers follow what she's been saying about actually admitting what they are producing and what they are measuring, that would be wonderful. To JP for going through the health plan situation, and I admire his skepticism. I think he wouldn't be alone in some of it. And to our two farmers, to Dan Marriott and to Chris Beckworth, thank you all very much indeed. I just, again, thank our sponsors for this evening. Again, we rely on them fairly much to run our regional activity. That's RAPA, MSD, Elanco, I've forgotten them now. British Wool, Cotswold Seeds. I've missed one somewhere, I think.
AgriWeb.
AgriWeb. Thank you, Dan. I hadn't got them written down. I ought to be able to remember them by now, didn't I? But again, thank you all very much. And as many of you as possible, I hope we'll see you back here tomorrow evening. As they say, same time, same place, with a different collection of speakers talking about measure to manage. I think that falls in fairly well as the second topic. and it's been underlined that you can't do much. It's been underlined this evening that you can't do much in terms of managing it unless you've measured it in the first place. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Yeah, I just should mention that, that it has been recorded and will be available on the NSA website if you want to review any of the talks at a later date, just as a reminder. So I should have said that earlier, but thanks, Jan.
Yeah,
Can I just get one last final plug in for the SCOPS podcast? Do go on the SCOPS website. You could download them, 35-minute listen when you're in the car, whatever you want to do. And we'd love your feedback, please, and see whether or not they're worth investing in some more. So give us some honest feedback.
And I suppose I should just end by saying the actual live day on Wednesday at Birmingham, which you'll find on the National Sheep Association website, does have a few tickets left available if anybody's interested. Thank you, Jan.
Nothing but a sales pitch this evening, is it? Thanks very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Jan. Good night.